Hello, digital world. Welcome back once again to another episode of Spliced In Later, the only show on YouTube that talks about movies and reviews them, unless you count every other show that's ever been on YouTube that talks about movies. It's a new movie review week this week. Another movie that was not on my radar, was not one of my most anticipated movies because it isn't a reboot, a sequel, all that stuff. And one that has happily surprised me and stuck with me. This movie is awesome. I thought it was fantastic. It could very well be my favorite movie of the year, which might be controversial because I can also admit that this isn't a perfect film. It has flaws. It's a little bit hit or miss in some places. But I think overall my movie experience was really good. And I think just the emotions I feel watching the movie sticks with me in a way that other movies don't. We'll see how we go. Time may change retrospectively. But basically what I expected the film to be, it was, but also was a bit different in other places. And the whole thing was just like, wow, okay, cool. That is an A24 movie. That is a movie that doesn't rely on IP brands or spectacles. And any talk about this being a reflection on current American politics and certain politicians, individuals, I don't think that's the case here. However, I'm not American. I don't know what it's like to live in America 24/7. I do not vote. I do not follow any political parties. All I see is what is on the news. And usually it's Donald Trump or Joe Biden or anything in between. So I don't know. If you're an American watching this, you might see certain aspects of your political beliefs or not reflected in this thing. And I can't speak to that experience. But for me, generally speaking, I think what's happening in this film is vague enough and not specific enough to really say, oh, that's definitely a Trump thing. That's definitely a Democrats thing. I don't know. I really can't say for certain. But for me, I think it's vague enough. And I think it's more a film on the concept of war itself and the silliness of it, the hopelessness, the insanity of the thing shown through the eyes of war journalists, which I think is an interesting aspect of war correspondence that does not get spotlighted on much, I think. At least not in this capacity. Anyway, it's a really good film. I'm really excited to talk about it. And let's get going. The movie is Civil War. Civil War, directed by Alex Garland. I know he's a great director. I just haven't seen everything he's done because of the wide varietyness of what he's done. Ex Machina he directed. That's one of my all-time favorite movies. A great showcasing of artificial intelligence and the bridge between humanity and that sort of concept. I won't talk about Ex Machina here, but I highly recommend you check it out. It's a really fantastic film and not very long, only 90 minutes. I also know he did that horror movie Men that came out either last year or the year before, and I will not see it because it looks like everything I hate. Scary, jump scares, all of that stuff. I don't know. I think that was more controversial. And then he did Annihilation, which I haven't seen, but I'm told I should because it is a horror film, but in essence, the horror that I'm actually into, which is unsettling, not boo 500 times. So he's a very competent director, and he's teamed up with A24, the most wonderful film studio in the whole of Hollywood, the only film studio that respected the writers and directors during the strikes, gave them what they requested because it was reasonable, and was able to go back to work almost immediately. A24 is also responsible for some fantastic films. Most common, I think everyone knows, Everything Everywhere All at Once, but there's some other good stuff. You should definitely check them out. They've got some really good content coming out, and I'm happy to say that I think they're becoming more and more mainstream, more and more noticeable for a general population as we inevitably are moving away from seeing Avengers 12 or Star Wars 65 or the Super Mario Bros. Strikes Again or everything that's just product and not art. A24, I think it's very safe to say, produces art in all its capacity, whether it's good art or bad art or subjective. These are ideas. This is the concept of film as it should be, I think. Unique ideas new ways of telling stories, something that's not, this will make us $1 billion. If it does, awesome. But that's not the whole purpose of what we're here today. So Civil War, very briefly, plot-wise, because I don't want to spoil it. As I said, I didn't know Civil War was a movie that was coming at all. One of my friends asked me to see it. He's like, first we see Monkey Man, and then we see Civil War. And I said, I don't know what you're talking about. What are those movies? I sort of got the concept as we got closer to it, especially I think as buzz went around to talk about this thing. There was a lot of positivity, also a lot of controversy, whatever. The basic concept, though, is the idea of America today descending into a civil war of some kind, complete anarchy. From what I gathered from watching it, there's essentially a main conflict between a chunk of America that's still under the president's rule, mainly New York and Washington and all of that, up against the Western forces, which is like California and Texas. That's the big thing. I can't tell watching it, which I think is by design and good, if any one side is evil or not. I think that's what's really great about the movie, is it doesn't really say this happened and now we're in a civil war. It's just drops you right into a civil war that is well on its way. If anything, it's heading to its conclusions, and it doesn't say what motivations and drives that everyone is following. It's just, this is the conflict that's currently there. There's also some talk about some independent states in different parts of America. Basically, the whole country is just in complete chaos, essentially. Everyone's fighting with each other constantly. During this time, we follow Kirsten Dunst playing a character called Lee. She is a war journalist, a very famous war journalist, apparently. She's been to conflicts all over the world, well before the Civil War stuff in America. Has a reputation for capturing some really gnarly but powerful imagery, photographing terrible conflicts. She's teamed up with another guy called Joel. He's the reporter of the two of them. She takes the photographs. He does the interviewing. So during the time that we pick up in Civil War, Joel and Lee both have the idea that they want to go to DC and interview and photograph the president, played by Nick Offerman. They think it's going to be an incredible scoop, an incredible picture. A lot of people tell them don't do that, because that's not just going past the front lines, that's going into a place that will probably execute them on sight. But they both have different reasons for wanting to do this. For Joel, he's a bit of an adrenaline junkie. When there's war and fighting and explosions, he seems to get off on it. For Lee, there's also the exact opposite. She's just become completely cast iron to the world. She's seen so much destruction, so many horrible things that humanity can do to each other. She still photographs it. She takes some good pictures, but it's just sort of a sense of giving up on the world, and she's just after the next picture to document it all. So when they're going to go after DC, they end up forming a little bit of a posse. They have an older guy played by Stephen McKinley Henderson, the wonderful Stephen McKinley Henderson. A little side note, he was playing a character in Dune who was completely cut from Dune 2, and I was really upset simply because I love that actor and I loved that character. But when he was interviewed about, do you harbor any terrible feelings about being cut out of Dune 2? He said, not really, because I was in Civil War and that's about to come out. So that's nice. So lovely. So it was great to see him. He's a veteran. He's been doing the war journalism stuff for a long time. He's all about self-preservation now as well. He knows what is the right story to chase and what's stupid. But he does need to get down to Charleston, apparently. He's going to the front lines there or something. So he needs a lift because he's old and he's fat and he's slow and he can't drive. So he muscles his way in with these two. And also a younger girl played by Kaylee Spaney, who is kind of like the proto Kirsten Dunst. Whereas Kirsten Dunst is old and broken and weathered. Kaylee Spaney is young and excited to enter the world of war photography, is inexperienced, is a bit shell-shocked and overwhelmed by what's going on. She sees Lee as a hero and a mentor of sorts, and wants to follow in her footsteps. So even though Kirsten Dunst is completely against it, she also weasels her way essentially into the group to tag along to go down to DC. What follows for the rest of the film is essentially a road trip from New York to Washington, DC, and how these four characters encounter little vignettes along the way, whether it's brief skirmishes, a sort of peace camp where people can get sanctuary and rest during the thing, run, I assume, by like the Salvation Army and the UN or whatever. Then they run into some terrible, racist, horrible people, one of them being a cameo from Jesse Plemons, before eventually getting down to DC at the time when all hell is breaking loose and everyone's advancing on the president. That's basically it. Each little thing that they encounter and what they go through elicits a different response from you. But the thing that defines this film 100% is anxiousness, tense, dread. These characters are interesting in that they're simple in what they want, but you as a viewer watching it immediately feel a sense of worry for them because of what they're putting themselves in danger, what they're trying to do, and the different ways they go about it because of the adrenaline junkie natureness of it, or just because they're sweet and lovely people like Stephen McKinley Henderson's character. But every situation that they put themselves in at any second, because of how volatile this civil war is and how people are shooting constantly and fights breaking out anywhere, and depending on who you run into, you're either with friend or foe. These people could die at any second in either sudden, surprising, unexpected ways or terrible, violent, gruesome ways. And seeing how these people react to it, how their personalities change. Kaylee Spaney, for instance, it's sort of a trial by fire for her as she learns what it is to live in this world and be a war photographer, and how originally it's like, yeah, I'm cool, I'm ready to go, let's do it. And then after a while it's like, Jesus, this is insane. But never straying from the core of her character, because even as she sees people get shot in front of her, mutilations, explosions, the worst things that humanity can do to each other, she still admits, like, this is really cool. I'm loving every second of it. I want to keep going. I want to see more. So it's really interesting to see that. I don't know what goes through a person's mind to want to be embedded in a war conflict like that, even not in a fictional sense, like Civil War. Like if you want to go to the Ukraine war that's going on right now, or back in the day with Iraq and Afghanistan or whatever, journalists being embedded with soldiers and being right alongside them as they go through war and violence and everything, and documenting it all and taking pictures. It's such a service to the rest of the world that you get to have this documentation to see what's going on. For better or worse, this is happening and people need to know it. But in order to get that shot, to get that interview, to be in the firing line and go back time and time again is nuts. It's something that I've never really thought about, and seeing it in this capacity is insane. And that's where you got to be warned for Civil War. If you're going to this because you think it's going to be like a big action movie or a war movie in the broadest sense of a Saving Private Ryan or a Battle Los Angeles, or like lots of shooting and guns and strategic planning, and now we're going to do this and we got to fight that, you're not going to get that in this movie, which I think is awesome. But it's also good for people to be aware of that. I think if that's why you want to see this movie, you'll probably be disappointed, because it really is the most realistic sense of being war correspondents and living in a conflict, going from place to place, encountering different things, different attacks, different situations, and just moving on, and how you cope with that situation. That's what the movie's really about, and that's what I really liked. It was a really interesting story that I wasn't expecting in something which I thought was just going to be, what if Donald Trump decided to nuke the world? That's honestly what I thought it was. I think that's what a lot of the controversy around this movie is going to be. There will be, much like with Joker, when that was coming and everyone was like, Joker's just inspiring violence and criminals and glorifying anarchy. And that really wasn't it. I mean, depending on what you get out of it, maybe, sure. But the movie hadn't even come out and people were already saying Joker's going to inspire violence. It's going to be the most controversial movie of the year. I think that's the same for Civil War. Because of the concept of a current day United States descending into anarchy and a civil war, because of how nuts American politics is right now, I think a lot of people are going, oh, okay, so Alex Garland is making a statement on what we're headed for if we don't straighten up and fly right. And then you watch this and it's like, oh, Nick Offerman playing Donald Trump. No. The point of the Civil War in the movie is not at all important. I have no idea why anybody was doing anything in this thing, apart from like characters being openly racist for obvious reasons. I don't know what was driving either side. And what's great about it as well is the movie doesn't pick a side and say this is the good one, this is the bad. If anything, it really highlights the senselessness of war, the insanity of it, and the hopelessness of the situation. People just killing each other for no reason, really, because someone doesn't like someone else. That person has to die. It's a senseless waste of human life. And I think that's what's great about Civil War, is it doesn't take a stance on what's right or what's wrong. It's just, regardless of what differences we have with one another, to just kill each other over senselessness is insanity. And if you want to see that insanity in a hypothetical situation that you can relate to, here it is for you right now. I also think it looks incredible. There's a really intense scene where a character has been hurt and then everybody else is driving in a car and they're driving through fire and the hurt character's sort of like reaching out to the embers. It's incredible. There's a lot of scenes in here as well where, in contrast to the violence and the terrible things you're seeing, the backdrop of the American landscape or just the beautifulness. It's great that this movie was shot outside and not in front of a green screen, because it does give it that sense of realism. The performances are great. As I said, Kirsten Dunst is really great. I was really intrigued by her character, and I felt for her in a lot of ways because of just the terrible things she's had to see. Kaylee Spaney is the young, reckless hothead who's unaware of what terribleness they're about to get into. She was great. I already said I love Stephen McKinley Henderson. The only one I had a kind of problem with was the Joel character, only because I just think the actor playing him might have been over the top in some of his things. One minute he's like, war is so good that I have an erection. And then later on he's like screaming and yelling because he just saw someone die. It's kind of like pick a lane, I guess. But that's like a nitpick, really. I don't know how I would react in a war situation. Maybe I would say and do those things as well. The true defining point of this movie, though, is the tension. Once you sit down and you watch this and you realize just how in danger these characters are, and any second something terrible could happen and they're gone, there's a sense that every scene you're just like waiting with bated breath for something to happen. And that makes for a really great viewing experience. Much like how I campaigned Saltburn. Whether you love Saltburn or you hate it because of the uncomfortable nature of it, you can't deny that regardless, you have an interesting viewing experience and it sticks with you. For better or worse, the scenes you see resonate with you in a way that you will remember. Civil War, there are several scenes in here based on just how on the edge of my seat, bated breath I was watching it, that will stick with me. I don't want to spoil the Jesse Plemons of it all. He's not in it that much, but obviously he's a big name, so they're like, come see Civil War, Jesse Plemons is in it. It's essentially a cameo, but it is a very important scene in the movie, and it is probably one of the most tense viewing experiences of all the movies I've ever seen. Bad stuff happens. It makes you feel sick. It makes you feel upset. And it makes you so worried that scene, that encounter with Jesse Plemons will stick with me for a long time. Civil War gets a 9 out of 10 from me. I want to give it a 10 out of 10, but I have to acknowledge that towards the end of the film, where everything's sort of wrapping up, it does sort of suddenly descend in a bit to chaos, which I think is okay, because it really is like at the close of this Civil War where everything's going to hell. But I do sort of feel like we sort of jumped from one thing to another without a nice point A, point B shuffling of situations. And I think the way some characters' stories end are fitting and good for what's going, but sort of leaves me going, oh, that's it. Okay, sure. But otherwise, I think it's really good. It's not too long. It's not over 2 hours. So if you're worried about it being too long, don't worry about that. It's something different. It's something unique. It's interesting, and it is an incredible viewing experience. And I highly recommend it. You should definitely go and check this out. If you're sick of seeing the same stuff over and over again, you got to go and see something like this, so more of it will be made. There was only like 2 other people in my screening, so that's not a good sign. It probably didn't cost that much to make this movie, so if enough people go and see it, it will turn a profit, and then Hollywood will go, hey, every Monkey Man made a lot of money, Civil War made a lot of money, and last year none of our Marvels except for Guardians was a profit, so maybe we should move in this direction more often. It's a unique experience, and you got to check it out while it's in cinemas, I think, as well, with the sound design for it as well. The sudden gunshots, the explosions, the silence in such terrible, tense situations. It's great. It's a great viewing experience. Highly recommend it. Go check out Civil War. It was awesome. Thank you very much for listening. I hope you've enjoyed. Next week, should be back for a regular episode of some kind. I won't be seeing a movie next week, but in 2 weeks, we will be checking out The Fall Guy with Ryan Gosling. God, I love Ryan Gosling and Emily Blunt. So I'm excited to review that. So I'm sure I'll come up with something in between that. Otherwise, there will be that review. And I hope for whatever I give out there to the YouTubes that you will listen to it and like it. So until then, love and appreciate you as always. Thank you for listening. You've been spliced in later. Adios, muchachos. I'll catch you next time.